morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where in the world you're signing in from today. Now, there's a bit of an international audience, so I appreciate you joining us. Today, I'm joined by Ian Bliss, CEO of Northern Shield Resources. Ian, it's great to have you back.
Thanks very much for having me, Romeo. It's good to be back too.
Awesome. Today, we're going to be talking about Northern Shield's most recent press release announcing more visible gold showing at Root Cellar and update broadly on work done and upcoming at the project. But a bit of housekeeping on my end before I pass it straight to Ian. So today's event is being recorded and will be available at both Six.com and YouTube by this afternoon because we're getting it nice and early today. But should say this event is also interactive. It's not just me and Ian talking to a blank screen. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat at any time during today's presentation. I'd even say the earlier the better. I'll be monitoring it while Ian's presenting. We'll get to as many questions as we can with the time we have today. But if we don't get to your question for whatever reason, or you feel like you want more details, please still put that in the chat. I'll make sure Ian gets the question and gets back to you as soon as possible. But thanks again, really, everyone, for joining us today. And without further ado, I'm going to pass to Ian for a presentation.
Thanks very much, Romeo, and good morning or good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you're sitting in the world. And welcome to this presentation on Northern Shield Resources entitled Sinter to Center, and why we think our recent gold findings are just the beginning. I'm going to march through our development at Root Cellar fairly methodically, and I hope you too, by the end of it, understand why we think Root Cellar may be the next big gold discovery in Canada. Before I go on, many of you have heard the well-known saying, "I skate to where the puck is going and not where it has been." And I'm sure I don't have to tell you who said that. And a lot of businesses, a lot of good businesses use that sort of mantra as well, but it very much applies to the exploration process as well. So as I march through this presentation, just try to keep that in the back of your mind about skating to where the puck's going and not where it's been. Because, of course, Wayne Gretzky, when he said that and when he puts that into action, it's not where he doesn't go there randomly. You know, he obviously has a lot of knowledge and understanding of the game. Those are all clues that he's picked up, and it's the same thing with exploration. So keep that in the back of mind as we march through the presentation. Before I begin the main part of my presentation, I do have to bring your attention to this forward-looking statement advisory, as this presentation will contain forward-looking statements. A little bit about Northern Shield, as many of you know, our strength, our space is exploring new or very early stage projects. We kind of like going where no man has gone before, so to speak. And while some view greenfield exploration as a risk, we see it as an opportunity and not just a risk. But we implement what we call a model-driven approach in our exploration strategy to reduce the risk to ourselves, our shareholders, and the environment. And it's that sort of approach that led us to our principal asset, Root Cellar, where we're exploring a very large footprint system of epithermal gold associated with silver, tellurium, and potentially copper porphyry as well. The project is located on the beautiful island of Newfoundland. Root Cellar is on the Burin Peninsula, a 3-hour drive from St. John's, an area that's very underexplored, and it appears remote, but it has absolutely excellent access compared to a lot of jurisdictions. So it's in the southeastern portion of Newfoundland. Many of you will know, a lot of the Queensway Newfoundland gold exploration and marathon is more in this area here. We're sort of operating alone. We're quite happy to be on the Burin Peninsula of Newfoundland. And having talked about forward-looking statements, here's one right here. This is actually a sign put up by some of the locals that I just noticed on my last trip down to the property. Mine Road, they actually put this up on where one of our drill access trails comes out and joins pre-existing roads. And I got down there now, and obviously the locals are very optimistic that perhaps one day they'll have a mine there as well. But as I say, it is a very welcoming place to work. I've never worked in a place that's more welcoming as an individual or as an exploration company. As you see from the stock photo, the Burin is very sparsely populated, yet it's easily accessible. The center of the Conquest Zone, where we're going to have a look at some of the mineralization today, is a 10-15 minute drive from the motel or rentals in Marystown, followed by a 10 or 15 minute walk. And as I say, excellent infrastructure includes a deep water port facility just outside of Marystown. So this whole region of the Burin has the benefits of being very underexplored, yet accessible. And in the past, you have to go further afield, a lot of helicopters to find those underexplored areas. but we have that here within a few minute drives from paved highways in the Burin Peninsula. It's a little bit about epithermal targets, and Newfoundland, is in an area called the Avalon Terrain. There are a number of known epithermal occurrences and related copper porphyries, like you can see by these dots, up and down the Burin Peninsula, and a few in the very eastern portion of the Avalon Terrain. Now, this is the same terrain that continues through Nova Scotia and down into the Carolina Gold Belt. And obviously, we're seeing a lot of activity in the Carolina Gold Belt. It's kind of actually a little bit full right now. A lot of staking has been going on. And yet, we're in the same geological terrain, and we literally have all the space. There's a handful of other explorers along the Burin, but we're the ones that are the only ones that are active right now. And I say the Root Cellar property sort of sits in the middle of that trend of epithermal occurrences, but vastly underexplored compared to the Carolina Belt, for instance, and that's underexplored compared to the more classic ones in Nevada and South America. But right from the beginning, we noticed something very different is happening in this area of the Burin Peninsula, and you can see that on this digital elevation model as well as magnetics in the bottom right. You can see there's a clear break. They call the Burin Peninsula a limb, and right here at the ankle, I used to call it a broken ankle, but someone more politely told me no, it's an ankle bracelet. But then, yeah, you can see this distinct break in the topography on either side of the Root Cellar Project. And if you look at the magnetic image, you see a similar sort of thing. The magnetics is basically trending with parallel to the limb until you get into the Root Cellar area when there's something cross-cutting it. No one's really sure what that is, but we believe it's to an extensional event. In other words, for most of the geological history, the rocks were sort of colliding here. But at one point, there was a brief episode of relaxation or extension. And that extension, or sort of pull apart, is a great opportunity for magmatic activity and, of course, hydrothermal activity. So a lot of the large deposits around the world and epithermal systems are related to a period of extension. Now, jumping into a little bit more detail about what we really have at Root Cellar. Gold was first discovered in the Conquest Zone by our local prospector in 2012. And really, Northern Shield was the only company to conduct methodical exploration on the property. A little bit of work in the early 2000s was done at Braxton Bradley, but the maximum of really work that came to was 3 Winky holes totaling about 100 meters. But none of this other area has seen methodical exploration. Project on a whole holds 5 gold, silver, tellurium occurrences over about a 6-kilometer strike length. The mineralization is hosted in a very distinct volcanic complex, a lot of indication of violent volcanic activity, which again is important for a lot of mineral deposits. And it does seem to be alkaline related, or at least subalkaline related. And that's important because alkaline related epithermal occurrences tend to drive very large and high grade epithermal gold systems. And so with all these 5 gold showings and the copper, our real focus is on the Conquest Zone, which I think as we march through this presentation, you'll begin to appreciate. We will be getting to the other showings bit by bit and putting more time, but there's good reason to be focusing on the Conquest Zone. Because the Conquest Zone, we believe, has all the ingredients to form a giant and very high-grade epithermal gold system. I know that alteration is probably one of the least favorite topics when it comes to shareholders, but I'm going to add this slide in here, partly because it's my presentation and I can, but partly also to my late father once told me that everybody has their story to tell, and I should always listen. And whether you're young, you're old, whether you're the president of NASA or you're someone that's considered boring, you all have a story to tell, and I should listen. And the same goes with alteration. It's telling us a story. I actually sent a picture similar to this to my younger brother a few years ago, and he said, "Wow, that looks like moldy ham," which is probably why we tend to go out to dinner rather than eat in when I go and visit him in Calgary. But if rocks look like moldy ham, it's actually a good thing. These are all highly altered rocks. In fact, I was talking to our master's thesis student who's doing a project, 2-year project at a Memorial University on Root Cellar. And he called me the other day because he was looking through some of these rocks at thin sections. And we gave him the least altered rocks to begin with, because that would be always a starting point to try to get your chemistry. And he told me that there's almost no original texture and no original mineralogy left in these rocks, even the unaltered rock. So, and they're all altered to some degree, some very highly. This rock in the top right-hand corner was a rhyolite. Originally, it looked something like this one on the bottom right. It should not look like this, but it has absolutely been bombed by alteration fluids, which are part of the mineralizing package. And interesting enough, this one was found very close to where we found the 111 gram boulder. The black in here, just as a side, is a lot of chlorite, and we're seeing this black chlorite associated with some of the visible gold, including what we just announced earlier on in this week. And now we start seeing this in parts of other rhyolites, so we're going to track it down. But right from the beginning, it wasn't when I first visited the property, along with our geologists when we were evaluating it prior to optioning it. Other than the high grade numbers the prospector was showing me, one of the key points that drove us to option this property was the amount of alteration. It's widespread and it's intense. And when it comes to deposits, especially large deposits, they leave an alteration signature, and we're sure seeing that at Root Cellar. So sorry, I guess the only other worst thing than talking about alteration is talking about structure. I'm going to jump on it here just for a few minutes. I'm going to sort of back off before going into detail about the mineralogy. Just look at the big picture here. So here's sort of a topographic map. There's a little DEM underlying this image here. So we really have two main structures that are controlling the mineralization at Root Cellar. These north trending structures, or trending 000 to 020, and these east-west structures, which fluctuate between about 80 degrees and 110. There's a lot of other structures in here, but these are the important one for mineralization. And the north trending ones, I think, are related to the pull apart, and so they're extensional. And then as they're pulled apart, of course, they allow room for fluids to come up. And certainly a lot of the IP, which are these red shaded areas, these are not all the IP. These are more some of the deeper ones, or the ones that we see at a variety of levels. They seem to follow both structures, but particularly the north trending ones. And I say these are pull aparts. There's more of them than these two or three that we see, and we know this one continues through. It just gets a little bit messy. You can actually see another one winding up through here. It goes right through Windfall, which is probably not coincidental. So there's more of these around, but we think this is one of the major sort of bounding, almost think of as a graben extending. And probably this one on the east side is a major one too. But certainly the mineralization seems to be following this, and the IP does. The other interesting thing to note when you just concentrate on the DEM model below, so the white shaded areas are higher up. Think of them as tops of mountains. So this portion of Conquest is actually fairly low lying in this block right in here. Obviously, there's lower terrain over here, and there's swamps, so we don't see much outcrop, but it's fairly low lying here. So probably erosion has actually cut it down to the level that we're now just beginning to see the mineralization. Whereas up in here in Conquest North, where you have a nice IP anomaly, that's actually underneath this elevated portion. So that's much deeper down. This has not been eroded. There's been more rocks piled on top, and that's what we'll see later, where we don't see a lot of mineralization, is because the target actually is much more deeply buried. But through various uplift and downlift of these blocks and erosion, it's been eroded a little bit more deeply at Conquest, and that's why we're starting to see the hints of the very top of the epithermal system in the Conquest Zone. So now adding on some of that more detail, particularly the mineralization on top of the structure and the very coarse representation of the IP. So first of all, you see in the Conquest Zone, a lot of gold mineralization, both high grade and low. These boulders up to 111 grams per ton. This one we still haven't found the source for. And then the more recent discovery of golden outcrop is over here, where we already have visible gold about 50 meters to the east and in drill core. But obviously some very high grades around, together with some very low grades. But these low grade occurrences, or gold anomalism, whether it's 100 ppb or even 25 ppb, that as geologists they consider anomalous, because background in these rocks is zero, is essentially zero gold, or certainly less than 5 ppb. And it's important to realize that, because these numbers, we're not in the mineralized zone. All these anomalous samples here, these sort of pink squares, even if they're low grade, are indicating leakage from something down deeper in the system. These are not part of the main epithermal system. We're not in the levels of crustiform coliform banding. So to see this footprint of gold mineralization is very important. It's indicating that there's a source to it, and they're often structurally controlled. So this is leakage from below. So most of the gold mineralization is hosted in a variety of hydrothermal breccias, as you see in the past presentation, particularly from the drilling from last year. We'll have a look at those a little bit later. We do have, then they're often associated with, again, the classic alteration assemblage of silica, marxite, and or pyrite, and illite, and particularly in the main Conquest Zone, we're seeing that, and that's a good vector towards the mineralization. We do have these odd rocks. This is a rhyolite dome. It actually has next to no sulfide in it whatsoever. It's basically potassic altered rhyolite with quartz veinlets and specular hematite, but it's always running in this area, 0.1 to 0.8 grams per ton gold. That rhyolite came up very light, so that may be sort of remobilization. And again, that's why we're very encouraged to try to drill this target, this IP target later on, because we got a lot of gold, anomalous gold on the surface nearby, and an intrusion that's come up later that may have remobilized some of the gold from that depth. So bottom line, a very large footprint of both gold mineralization and anomalous gold in the Conquest Zone. Just going back to Conquest North 2, I said is basically buried underneath this ridge, but you can see how on the fringe of this IP anomaly, we do see soil samples anomalous in gold represented by these red dots, and the odd mineralization represented by red or pink squares. So we're not seeing it obviously in the middle because it's too deep, but where that almost comes to surface at the edge of the IP as it outcrops on either side of that ridge, we're picking up hints of mineralization. Along here too, we have quite a string of anomalous gold soil samples. Ice direction basically almost was subparallel to this fault, so we're not sure whether these samples are telling us that this fault zone is mineralized, or whether we should be going to the west-northwest following it, which is ice direction, to find the gold source. But clearly there's more gold around to be found based on the soil samples and these boulders, which we still haven't found the source for, but we're pretty sure that they're in this area, which we've tried to trench, but so far haven't got deep enough. So let's say we talk a lot about the anomalous gold, but we also have a lot of VG. I think we have about a dozen occurrences to date. The latest one is this photo here, which actually had 4 little flakes of clusters, sort of amalgamations of fine-grained gold in these quartz veinlets and quartz blebs. Most of the gold we see, we do have rocks with disseminated mineralization and pyrite, but the higher grade golds are coming in these quartz veins. Including, say, the Discovery Trench last year, 3 drill holes drilled in the same area, and now this quite spectacular looking rock with gold associated with hematite again, and very, very coarse pyrite. And we haven't seen this type of coarse pyrite again, and associated also with that in a matrix of the black chlorite, which we now know is quite important for the phase bringing in the visible gold. So a lot of anomalous gold, but clearly also we're seeing a lot more visible gold, which is very, very encouraging, particularly where we're seeing it right now. We talked about these structures at the beginning of the slideshow, the north trending structures along the east-west. The top left-hand image is IP chargeability along with the gold mineralization. So you can see there's a general trend east-west, whereas at depth, if you peel that layer back and look at depth, there's definitely a north-south component to some of the IP chargeability anomalies. We didn't really figure that out until after the 2021 drill program, and that's why these holes drilled in 2021 missed those targets. It's because we assume the east-west trending anomalies continue to depth, and they don't for a large degree. And so it's these north-south ones that we over the last few years began to realize are important. And we don't really see them on the geophysics, but last year we actually started to see them in outcrop, particularly the Discovery outcrop. And here the main outcrop trends east-west, and you can just make out there's a fabric in this rock about 1.5 meters wide, and these are trending north-south, or actually 0 degrees. So this is exactly what we see on the regional scale, and now we're seeing it on a smaller scale. And of course, this is where we're getting some of our better grade, and where we just trenched the other day and announced the visible gold. It's a very similar setting, just about 50 meters further to the east. The interesting thing too is some of these rocks up in here, certainly when you get to the road about another 3 meters up, you see a hint of a little bit of veining, but not to the degree that you're seeing down here. So we're pretty sure some of these volcanic rocks were being dumped on top of the system during the sort of the late sort of phases of that epithermal system. So it doesn't always, there is capping rock, basically capping that mineralization, and so you can step from unmineralized rock down to high grade within a few meters with very little indication of it other than some fracturing. And again, just on a smaller scales too, this is a rock sample from this outcrop. You can clearly see the quartz veins in two different directions, which matches the structure. And again, we also have the hints now of getting crustiform, coliform banded rocks. So you want to see this as you're approaching the boiling zone. The boiling zone is where you're going to get your higher grade mineralization. So we're just beginning to see these more frequently in this portion of the Conquest Zone. And here's now zooming in. So we're actually only zooming into a tiny portion. The Conquest Zone stretches about 750 meters of near continuous mineralization. So we're now in what you call the Discovery Trench area, which we now know is what we call upflow. But in that, we have an area about 100 meters long, 35 meters wide, where everything is mineralized, or at least heavily anomalous in gold, whether it's in drill hole, and this is a combination of drilling and surface data. So a fairly substantial area of continuous mineralization, obviously some very high grade, both on surface, where we had the original trench discovered 45 grams of gold, big intersections of moderate grade in drill hole, 34 meters of 0.6, and then the visible gold in the top of 21 last year. And it's just right next to that or behind it that the new occurrence of visible gold was trenched as we pulled off a little bit more rock from essentially that drill pad. And we'll have a look at those in a minute. But it's actually behind that collar, so that drill hole did not intersect that vertical sequence of rocks in that drill hole. We did get, I say, visible gold at the very top of this hole, but it looks different, completely different from the vein that we just found. And I say, clearly from where it's located, it was drilled ahead of the new trench. There was more gold in this area than what we found to date. But one of the key things too is everything is telling us in the Conquest Zone as we move west towards this point that we're getting near what we call the upflow zone, which we'll see in the next few slides. We're getting more consistent grade. We're seeing more visible gold. We're seeing hints of crustiform, coliform banding, which as we go eastwards, we tend not to see. We do pick it up in a few places, but we're seeing more potassium. Potassium is a good pathfinder in alteration, which is telling us you're getting towards the hotter zone. And even something called illite crystallinity numbers, which a lot of the experts use at these epithermal deposits around the world. And that's basically not just looking at the alteration mineral, which in this case is illite, they're looking at certain factors in it. And, we're getting consistent IC numbers above 1. And experts will tell you that's the threshold of what you want to see immediately above your epithermal vein systems. And certainly paper we've been reading on Lepanto, it's exactly that. Further away, it's around 0.5, and above 1, you're right above the main veins in Lepanto. And we're seeing consistent IC numbers above 1 as we move towards, almost all of this area, but certainly very, very strong in around hole 21. And we've just done more tests in this area and background to try to see how accurate that is and whether we can use it more. But everything is telling us that this is an upflow zone, and as we move westward through this portion of Conquest, we're getting into the more likely area for heavier gold mineralization, and certainly at the very top of the system. And so here's the recent trenching. This dot here is it marks more westward. Hole 21 was collared into that outcrop. The other drilling for 16 was about 75 meters to the west here. So we had a little vein running through here, and the contact between sort of a very heavily brecciated unit, and then down here just heavily silicified and pyritic. But as you can see, quite a spectacular aggregate of fine-grained gold in these quartz veins. And in that case, you see marcasite on one side. Marcasite is essentially pyrite. It's just formed at lower temperatures. And then the coarser pyrite. And within that, you see, that's the big contact. There's a brecciated unit. Above it, we have Sinter. Sinter is what forms at that mound at the top of the outflow zones where these fluids would have essentially breached surface at the time of formation, which we don't know how old it is, whether it's 300, 500, or 600 million years old. This essentially, the surface we're on right now is essentially the surface that existed when this epithermal system was formed. And if you just go up in here, there's very little indication, certainly mineral-wise. You might get 25 ppb occasionally out of some of this stuff, but it's not very altered, other than you see a few fractures of epidote. Quite a few fractures of epidote, actually, and that's the only hint. But the chemistry is not really passing through there, and that's some of our problem. Is we can be a few meters vertical from visible gold, and yet you're seeing very little signature indication of it geochemistry-wise. There are subtle indications in the rock, this epidote alteration, but I say you can go from zero to high grade very, very quickly in a matter of a few meters. And that's why it's important to, when we look at these lower grade samples of 0.1 gram per ton, is not to ignore them. We can be extremely close to high grade mineralization. But a lot's going on in this outcrop, a lot of quick transitions from different textures. Like this little breccia zone is quite small. It's different from the one down in here. And again, that's an indication you're really close to the upflow zone. We're just getting repeated pulses of hot fluids under significant pressure blasting its way to surface. So that also tells us that we're really close to the essentially right above one of the main epithermal systems. And here it's small, but this is more classic crustiform coliform banded vein, and so again another indication that we're getting near to the boiling zone. So here's a sort of schematic diagram of a classic intact epithermal gold system where you have the Sinter mound on the top. That's exactly what we're seeing up here. You get a lot of brecciation. We've seen that in drill core. I'm sure many are familiar with it from last year's drilling. A lot of brecciation. And here's some of the indication of what look like muddy hot spring sediments, which you would expect where these things come to surface. Think about the Yellowstone geyser, for instance. This is elevated in gold, elevated in arsenic, a little bit of mercury. That's a classic signature for this high up in the signature. And then we got these fragments of what look like sinter. So everything that's telling us is that we're up here in the epithermal system. Your high grades, particularly your bonanza, are typically a few hundred meters, at least 50 meters below that. But we're now seeing visible gold at the same level, and that bodes really well as to this is an extremely fertile system. The boiling level does fluctuate, so generally it's in boiling zones not happening up here. You never know, something could happen, and one episode of fluid migration could create boiling at different levels. So that level fluctuates. But the fact that we're seeing visible gold this high up in the system, I think bodes very, very well as to what may be found deeper in the system. And we may not have to go that deep. There are examples where the sinter form almost immediately above the main mineralization. I'll have a look at an example later on in this slideshow. But as clearly evidence is telling us, at least in that Conquest Zone, we're right up in here. And so very encouraging to see that gold now matters, just tracking it down through drilling, hopefully this fall, to get into the main part of the vein system. And here's a very interesting slide. So first of all, on the top left here, I'm really just zooming in. I'm zooming into the top portion. If I go back here, we're just kind of zooming in up here to this top portion of the epithermal system to show, you often get breccia pipes at the top rather than the classic veins. You have your main sinter mound right above it. It may, again, form a little bit to the side, but you often get outflow going laterally. And we certainly see that in the Conquest Zone. In fact, much of the drilling in 21, we were drilling, because it's very pyritic, it does carry gold, we were drilling this horizon. And that's why we drilled underneath it, thinking it was a vertical sheet. We didn't get anything because we had a lateral flow. And so we're really seeing the classic intact top portion of the outflow zone of an epithermal system. And here's a diagram taken from a paper we recently read on Fruta del Norte, gold silver deposit in Ecuador. It's an excellent paper. I really recommend you reading it. It's quite long. there's technical parts, but there are parts that anybody can take away. You don't need to be a geologist to have some good takeaways from this project, especially how they discovered this system by just marching through, very methodically a process to find this. And unlike Root and Cellar, we actually see gold mineralization, because here in yellow is actually their Sinter. That's an equivalent of where we are right now on surface. So they didn't even have the Sinter. They were still 100 meters above that, but they're finding very subtle hints of silicification with some of the Pathfinder elements, weakly anomalous gold, maybe 100 ppb, along with arsenic, mercury, antimony. And, they clearly saw evidence of an epithermal system. Obviously, did a lot of homework, a lot of mapping, a lot of geophysics. They originally drilled an IP anomaly out here, didn't hit much. They drilled another target and bang, hit the Sinter. Still low-grade gold, but they recognized it as a Sinter, hit other fragments in that hole of vein material, steepened the hole up, and got 237 meters of 4 gram. A few holes later, 204 meters of 8 grams per ton. And so this was essentially a blind deposit found by just marching through in a methodical fashion and understanding epithermal systems. And so, as I say, the gold that we're seeing on surface, we would probably be equivalent to here, just above or at the same level as the Sinter that they're hitting. And so, that's what's important to keep in mind, is we're not in the main part of the system yet, but all that gold we're seeing bodes very well as to what's hiding at depth. Clearly, there's a source for that gold. Let's just hope that we have these sort of grades. But when we're finding all the gold at Conquest that we are, it strongly suggests that that's all leakage from something at below. But so anyhow, if you have time, I strongly recommend you looking at this paper from time to time. And it's a great credit to their geological crew of how they marched through an exploration progress to find this literally completely buried epithermal system in the jungle. And that's what we're hoping to find at Northern Shield. There are a lot of other similarities to Fruta del Norte, particularly Alteration, and the fact that Fruta del Norte too was originally a copper porphyry halo, and that the gold mineralization overprinted that, and then we're seeing the same sort of thing at Root and Cellar. And so anyhow, it's a very interesting paper that I recommend you to read. And this is what we think we're in the Root and Cellar, is just at this solar portion. As usually these Sinters can be much higher than the vein system, but Fruta del Norte is unusual. It's right on top of the main vein systems, and we're getting that sort of impression from this recent trenching where we're getting visible gold in the Sinter. So we think we're right above that portion of at least one of the veins. Again, just stepping back, just looking at this as a magnetic image, actually taken from 300 meters depth with our anomalous gold samples on surface. And so you can see how closely the gold that we're finding on surface is matching this magnetic low. And of course, these mineralizing systems, the alteration often leaches out the magnetism of the rock, so you get magnetic destruction. And so when you start seeing magnetic lows, they don't always have to be the blues, which are lowest. Even here is low because it's low compared to what it should have been, the hot pink colors. But you can clearly see a very strong correlation to the gold we're on surface to the deeper magnetic signature, which is low. And when you see that, it's really hard to believe that there's not, that the gold's, number one, related to whatever's causing this magnetic low. And for various reasons, you assume that magnetic low is structurally controlled, but very close correlation between gold mineralization and magnetic low. And on top of that, the classic Pathfinders, like in Fruta del Norte, you have arsenic, antimony, and mercury. Here's antimony here. These are just rock samples in our soils. These are the two main sort of gold trends in the center of the Conquest Zone. You can see it's a very distinct halo, probably on the order of a kilometer, surrounding what we're seeing, the outcropping portion of that vein system. Little hints of it along the other showings, little hint at drop zones or Windfall, Braxton Bradley, but quite a clear, large footprint of antimony at the Conquest Zone, and same with arsenic in the rock sample. So we got the classic Pathfinders that that you expect to find high up in the system in epithermal systems. Adding now also the magnetics to the IP. I know there's a lot going on in this diagram. So we have the original main structures, the north trending structures on the east-west. Don't worry about the different colors of all these little lines, but they're marking some of the IP anomalies from the different surveys and different depths. So wherever you see number one, either thick lines or a whole cluster of them, that means a lot's happening. And you can see in here, there's a lot. In every survey, we've done 2 different IP surveys, and both surveys have been modeled in 2 different methods. And in this area here, what we call line 4900, we see an IP chargeability on both surveys and on both renditions of the modeling. So essentially 4 different manifestations of the IP survey. So that's, when you see it on 4 different processes, you have strong confidence that it does exist. It's perfectly legitimate. And so the strong one, it goes to depth. And more importantly, it's right next to this very distinct mag low. And you can see a lot of the IP are paralleling it, sometimes just off to the side. So when it comes to drilling, we're unsure, do we target the IP or do we target the mag low? But that's why when we go into the next drill program, we need to go into with a bigger drill budget to make sure we test everything, both the IP and the magnetic lows. But again, you see in this portion of the Conquest Zone, a magnetic low right underneath where we're getting some of the better grades. So very strong correlation to IP and magnetic lows. Again, in Conquest North, you can see how a lot of these IP targets are on the fringe of this magnetic high as it drops down into this low. And again, these are the same idea. We're just dropping deeper down into the system from 300-meter depth from the big image down to 600 meters. And again, if you look at that one, the really strong magnetic low, right where we have our best IP target, and a lot of gold on surface. So, we have the IP matching the gold that we're getting near surface, and now we're seeing a strong correlation between the magnetic lows and the IP as well. So all multiple data sets supporting our interpretation. So what does that bring us to right now? So we're based on the IP or drilling and our understanding of these various systems. The idea is to run a larger drill program right now this fall. The money we gain from Brevet Quebec is enough for a very small drill program, perhaps another 500 meters. But we really need a much larger drill program to target these things at depth and give us some option. Much of that drilling, sort of 4 to 7 holes, we're kind of looking at in the western portion of the Conquest Zone where we're finding that upflow zone. So hit it a few holes fairly shallow to follow it down, but otherwise step back and with the mag and the IP hit these things a little bit deeper. 2 to 4 holes in that area where we have that very nice deep IP and a magnetic low. And then 1 or 2 in the eastern Conquest Zone, partly to try to follow up where we're seeing that high-grade boulder. And we have a good indication of where it is based on structure and the IP. And then probably 1, maybe 2 holes into Conquest North more to try to get a better understanding of what's going on in there. Like I say, we have a lot of rock that was post-mineralization dumped on top. So the only way to begin to understand what's happening down here is to put a few drill holes into it. So we really want to focus in this portion of the Conquest Zone. Everything is telling us that, this is where the top of the vein systems are. And so that will be the focus of a drill program this fall. We are also running a new drone magnetic survey, hopefully probably even end of next week. Before the end of the month for certain. And that'll be run in a different direction as to this original magnetic data, because this original magnetic data was run north-south, and that's parallel to the structures that we want to see. So we now want to fly in a different direction at a much tighter spacing. And everyone we talk to says a key component in epithermal exploration is getting a really high density, high resolution magnetic survey. So very, very shortly, we'll be flying this by a drone and have that results prior to implementing the drill program. But we're very excited to see that because that should help highlight these targets even better than what we see right now. So what does that look like? Sort of as a compilation, we've seen it from plan view. Now let's look at a cross section. The main image here is magnetics, roughly down to about 1,000 meters. Just take that with a pinch of salt for its accuracy. But clearly you can see here the gold sort of in 3D draped on surface. So this is the Conquest Zone. Here's that rhyolite dome I talked about. This is where all the activity is going on, both last year and the recent trenching. And you can see now on the very strong magnetic low that continues to depth. We have another one over here. We call the line 4900. And there's a nice, really nice IP chargeability anomaly at the top of that. The IP doesn't see as deep as the magnetics, nowhere near. The IP is really just seeing, 100 meters. You might see something down to 150. So it's only seeing the very, very tops of these systems. It's not seeing what's that depth. And we're also a little bit leery too about strictly chasing the IP chargeability targets, because at depth these may turn into more of a vein system, and most epithermal systems don't have a lot of pyrite. So we want to be careful about targeting specifically the IP, and that's why having the magnetic data is very important. But this type of target doesn't get much better. You clearly get a magnetic low going to depth, a big pocket of very low grade, and you have a chargeability that's more or less overlapping it. And we see the same thing, line 5200. We see a nice IP target in and around the current trench, and so these will be the targets in the drill program. Say most of what we've probably been targeting in the Eastern Conquest portion, particularly in the first year drill program, was basically the lateral flow. And so that's why we didn't hit it at depth, sort of like a blade or a hull-shaped body that's sort of emanating from one of the main vein systems, which we think we're onto right now in and around the whole 21 area. But this is just a small part of Root Cellar, but it's a large system. When you look at this, 300 meters apart, these two, what we think are the two main veins, there's probably another one in the middle based on the magnetics. We still think there's going to be a main system outcropping somewhere around hole number 5 or hole number 6 from the 2021 drilling. Certainly, that's where we have the high grade boulder. But this is not a small system when you look at the IP, the modeling, and the surface footprint, and that's why we're really encouraged about where this thing may lead to. And so to just begin to summarize the opportunity, we now have 100% interest in the Root Cellar Project. We made the final payment to the prospector just a few months ago after the Revenue Quebec payment. And Root Cellar has, as I said, all ingredients to form a giant and high-grade epithermal gold system. We see a very large footprint, 2 to 3 square kilometers on surface, and that's really just talking about the Conquest Zone. Perhaps the Conquest Zone links up to Windfall. But all this represents leakage. It's not the main part of the system. We see geophysics, whether it's IP or magnetics, supporting a vein system continuing to depth. And again, that magnetic low footprint is very large, and it matches the gold we see on surface. We've identified the Sinter zone and the outflow, so that means the system is intact. A lot of these things get eroded. Actually, Hickey's Pond, which is an epithermal occurrence further north in the Burin Peninsula, when they started looking at that chemistry, they began to deem they were below the boiling zone. So they had a little bit of gold, but they had been eroded. We now know at Root Cellar that the system is essentially intact, it hasn't been eroded, and so the best part is still below us. A lot of data based on the chemistry is the rocks, including the tellurium, suggests that this is an alkalic, or probably more likely a subalkalic driven system. And alkalic systems are known to form not only large deposits but high grade. Cripple Creek, Porgera example of alkaline driven systems. And so it appears that we have that at Root Cellar, and that again supports the very large footprint that we're seeing. And I say we also have tellurium. The highest grades are at drop zone and Windfall, but actually we have much more extensive tellurium mineralization in the Conquest Zone. So a very good indicator of both copper porphyry and epithermal golds, particularly in the upper portions of the system. So it's not a potential value. Tellurium is a critical metal, but more importantly, it's indicative of very large gold systems. And of course, we have the copper porphyry, which again we're focused on the gold at the Conquest Zone. We think that's the big prize at the end of the day. But there are some good grades of copper, especially to the southwest of the Conquest Zone. We're beginning to understand that these are being exposed in a series of quarries. And at some point, we'll go back and sort of try to get the copper potential up to speed. But right now, clearly the focus, with good reason, is the Conquest Gold. And I say we are in the stage of planning, or not in the stage, but well through the planning stages of a drill program. I say we want to expand that from 500 meters to something on the order of 2,500 or perhaps 3,000. And so we're just in the process of getting the funds together for that. But I think it's going to be a very exciting drill program. I feel very confident based on the various data sets and the gold that we're finding continue to find on surface. And so I think this represents a rare opportunity to potentially get involved in we're certainly seeing the indications of what could be a very large epithermal gold discovery. And so I hope you believe us too, that we're onto something very significant. And as I said at the beginning, exploration is a lot like trying to follow where the puck is going and not where it's been. And we think when it comes to the next big gold discovery in Canada, the puck's going to be right here at Marystown and Root Cellar. So thanks very much for your time, and happy to take any questions.
Thanks so much, Ian. Appreciate it. So we do have some great questions from the audience that we'll get to in a couple seconds. I just had a couple questions myself to get through, just so we can jump through a couple of them. Then we'll get to the ones from the audience. Hopefully we'll get to all of them today, but again, if we don't, I'll make sure Ian gets your question. You'll get it answered soon enough. So first, Ian, and I think you covered this a little bit, but just for clarity for folks in the audience, you noted in the press release that although this new occurrence is proximal to drill hole 23 RC21, where visible gold was previously noted in that previous news release, the mineralization styles are different. So I'm curious if you can explain the significance of this to investors.
Yeah, so essentially what it means we haven't tested this zone, so we're at the top of 21. So we sort of the zone would be here, and the drill hole was in front of it. So we never hit that zone continuing to depth. That I think that the top of hole 21 was 21 grams over half a meter, maybe 10 grams over 2.5. So if we had stepped back, if you'd known about that zone, you don't know what the grades are. We're still pending assays or pending on these grab samples, but it just hasn't been tested. So that top interval of 21 would be wider and higher grade, but it's just showing that there's another zone there that was missed. And so this is a very complicated system. You get quick changes in geology, but it just means there's another zone there that we should be targeting in the next round of drilling. Back off, perhaps drill it another direction. One of the things too in that new showing is, we clearly see the intersections of those north-south structures and the east-west, and that drill hole did not intersect the north-south features. It was off to the side. I think it actually hit it at depth, and interesting enough, at depth in one area we do have again 3 or 4 grams, and that may have been the same zone just at depth. So we'll drill it at a different orientation, but it just means that there's more gold there than even what we knew about in last year's drilling.
Yeah, right on. Now I want to talk about sinters really, really quickly because I'm not a geologist, obviously, but I know that a sinter is often a great indication of a potential epithermal system, which I think you've covered. I'm curious, do you intend to drill the sinter to see if it hosts mineralization? Because from my understanding, they're often or at least sometimes barren.
Yeah, well, essentially, I mean, hole 21 was partly in sinter. We hit these muddy sediments, so that was part of the sinter. Some of those breccias were sinter, so we've drilled it. In that area, we'll continue drilling it because we're finding grade in it. But really, what we want to do is start getting below that, where that transitions more into strict veins. What we want to be careful of is not chasing all these IP anomalies. Certainly, there's a lot of pyrite in the sinter zone, which is bringing anomalous gold. But we really want to get below that. So in that particular region, we're getting visible gold in the sinter by veins that are coming up sort of probably late in the system. So we're not going to totally ignore it. But yeah, we don't want to spend too much time drilling the sinter in other places intentionally, because we really want to find out where these veins are. When it comes to Conquest North, some of that big IP anomaly may be a big sinter blanket, in which case, if you can get a hole in that, then at least you're in the area of a vein system.
Sure.
And so some of those targets, the IP targets, we will test and intentionally drill them as potential sinters, because then it's just a matter of keep tracking it back into the where the vein system is. But the Sinter in the eastern Conquest portion where we drill 21, we won't do too much, as a 1 or 2 holes at one end where we think another vein may be coming up. But that portion, no, but certainly where we're hole 21 area and where we just trenched, we'll put some holes in it, because it seems to be the center right on top of that main vein system. And that clearly fluctuated. So at one point, gold-bearing fluids came up, and it's not, the center's not entirely intact. Like, this thing's been butchered by multiple episodes of brecciation, veining, hydrothermal explosion. So it's not eroded down, but it's seen better times. But that's good, because every other event is clearly bringing up, at least some of them are bringing up high grade visible gold.
Great.
So yes, drill it, but the main thing is to now start tracking these vein systems to depth.
Right, makes sense. And looking at your press release, the images, they're chip samples. That's correct.
They're sort of composite samples from the outcrop. Yes.
So, are you expecting / can investors expect an updated news release with assay results?
Yeah, we've rushed those samples, so hopefully within a week we'll have those results. Other ones are going in, but we did rush a batch from that trenching program,
Awesome.
which are in the lab right now, and they expect it hopefully any day now.
Love any day now.
Yeah.
That's a good timeline. So I do want to get to questions in the chat, but I just want to talk really quickly because I know this has been a long time coming, but I saw the news release you put out, and you referenced it in your presentation on the long-awaited refund from Revenue Quebec. That obviously must be relieving.
Yeah, I mean, it was a relief. I mean, there's been so many twists and turns in this, and such a long time frame, essentially 6 years, and the last year or two have been particularly taxing, both mentally on myself, CFO, and then of course, funding the lawyers. But so it was mentally taxing. It was a relief. I think if it had happened a few months before that, I may have said woohoo and had a party. But there was so many twists and turns in the last little bit. It was just, thank goodness, get the money in the bank and move on. So it's unfortunate that small companies like Northern Shield have to go through these type of battles, but it's shareholders' money. We felt all right from the beginning. We were confident that we were entitled to this money. We were told multiple times, no, you're not. But we understood the regulations, and it was a matter of perseverance, and it paid off. But it's unfortunate. Mistakes are made, but it took a lot out of us for that time period. The good thing is we got the money at a good time when otherwise markets were not so fluid. But it was a relief that it finally came in. But you never know when you're going through the courts, but we always felt confidence, and it has implications to exploration too. If we didn't think there was anything at Root Cellar, we'd drop the project. Just as if we didn't think we had a valid reasoning for that refund, we would have dropped that. But when you make sure you push through.
It's a perseverance game for sure.
Indeed, yeah.
Yeah. A question from the chat from Tony. He's curious when exploration season ends in November, or in Newfoundland. Pardon.
In that portion, I would say it doesn't really end. I mean, they get very little snow. They might get a few snowstorms, but it melts. I would probably say, December is just typically late December when they may start getting some snow, and then January, by the end of February, it's gone. Of course, it could be wet,
sure,
in the fall or in the spring, but snow is not going to be a problem there. Even in the winter, you can drill, but as far as field work, by end of November or even beginning of December, you kind of want to be out. You're going to see the ground, but it's going to start getting a little bit wet. So we don't have to worry about it too much in that part of Newfoundland, but really sort of mid-December to mid to end of February.
Great. No, appreciate that. If the non-Canadians in the audience, not all of Canada is under snow for 6 months. It's different parts. Yeah. Charlie from the chat asks, first he says, thanks for the explanation on Root Cellar, and notes the emphasis on this discovery is understandable. But he's wondering if you could do a I know we've only got a few minutes left. A quick update on Shot Rock, just to see if there's any geological similarities with Root Cellar.
Yeah, well, the sunrise, that are epithermal systems. One of the key components, reasonings why we're not at Shot Rock right now is the data told us we were in the heart of the system. We were intersecting beautiful crustiform, coliform banded quartz veins with adularia, so the higher temperature minerals, a little bit of sulfide. Everything was telling us we were in the heart of the system. And the first drill program, we got a little bit of gold, but every time we went back and drilled, and we thought we were going to get good results because the veins looked beautiful, we didn't have the gold. And so in Shot Rock, the data told us that it wasn't a gold-rich system. You might be more gold there, maybe somewhere else, but everything was telling us that the gold wasn't there, because we should have, in these veins, we should have been getting higher grade gold, or just gold. Some places they were hardly detectable, which is completely different from Root Cellar, where we're not even in the boiling zone, and we're seeing gold, and a lot of gold. Like we at Shot Rock, we even on surface we hardly saw any gold, yet we're seeing these veins. The highest surface sample at Shot Rock was 5 grams, and then quickly dropped off as a few in the 1 gram, but we didn't have a lot of gold. And if we knew we were way above the system, like they were at Fruit Tectonic, you could say, well, fine, you don't expect to see gold. But we were in the heart of that epithermal vein system, and we weren't getting gold. And when you look at that, it's just like, okay, well, it's telling us that this is just not a fertile gold system. And so, you don't tie it back up. It's like, no, we're going to go where the data is telling us it's fertile, and so it's a night and day difference. But it's a good question, because, yeah, the data at Shot Rock told us, essentially to pack it up because it's not there.
Oh, great, thank you. Somebody in the chat notes raising funds obviously challenging in the current environment, and they ask if there's consideration. Answer to the best of your abilities. It's a long-term consideration, but if there's been thinking around offloading other discoveries in order to fund continued exploration at Root Cellar.
Well, we certainly, there's a lot of, it's an building interest in Root Cellar. We're trying to steer that towards strategic financing. So there's obviously, we have the big one that I think is on our mind to generate some sort of, to monetize is Edifix, this nickel copper PG project that we have in northern Quebec, which has a lot of merit. It's more of a PG project. There is nickel copper assets there too, and it's a fabulous project. In better days and in our early lifespan, we would be back up there. Again, a lot of data is showing that this is a conduit system, which is when you're exploring for nickel copper PGs, you want to be in it. It's very different from everything else in the Labrador Trough. And I think it holds one of the keys to the nickel mineralization in the Labrador Trough. So we're trying to monetize that. For some reason, it's, people haven't jumped on it right away. I think there's a lot of companies that just don't understand these systems. But there's always interest, and that's what the one we're trying to leverage to help finance Root Cellar.
Awesome. With about 30 seconds left, unfortunately, I just want to get the one last question. John asks, what funds are required for 3,000 meters?
3,000 meters is essentially in Newfoundland about $600,000. We have to wait for the quotes to come in from the drilling companies. Typically, an all-in cost is around $200 a meter there. The last time, we'll see if that's the same, but it's on the order of $600,000 to do a 3,000 meter drill program.
Perfect. Right into the wire. Ian, thanks so much. This is a great deep dive, and everybody who joined, obviously, thank you, and those watching the replay at home. If you have any additional questions, please do reach out. I'll make sure Ian gets them and they get back to you as soon as possible. But everyone, thank you so much. Have a great afternoon.